Hi, Richa. Can you hear me? Yeah.
We're live, so if you could mute yourself, Raj.
Okay,
We're
great.
live.
Great. Oh, we're live. Okay, wonderful.
We're having an issue with the live stream. It's not, it says it's going live, but it's not, I don't see it on Facebook, so.
We can give it another minute, Mansi, before we get started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Please give us another minute while we work on our back-end technical issues. We'll start in 30 seconds or so. So nice to see so many familiar faces. Thank you all for joining us. All right, let's get started. So good evening, everyone. And if you're an intrepid early riser in India, a very early good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us for the second session of the Indiaspora Philanthropy Summit. We had a wonderful first session this morning with a lot of great insights and a lot of very stimulating discussion with actionable items as to what NGOs and philanthropists can do to move the needle. We are now in our second session, and I know that most of you on the call know Indiaspora, but some of you don't. And so let me start by introducing Indiaspora. First of all, I'm the executive director of the organization. My name is Sanjeev Joshipura, and I'm speaking with you from just outside of Washington, D.C. Indiaspora is a nonprofit organization founded in 2012 by the successful San Francisco entrepreneur and investor M.R. Rangaswamy, and you'll see him a little bit later in the program today. We essentially are a collection of Indian diaspora leaders and Indians resident in India across a variety of different professions and a variety of different geographies. And we focus specifically on four things. Philanthropy and social impact has always been a cornerstone of Indiaspora's activities, and I'll get to that a little bit more in a second. We are also very involved in community activities and nonpartisan socio-political work. We focus on what we call our Global Connect program, where essentially we connect the leading Indian diaspora across countries in many different professions. And we are also very involved in building the US-India relationship on a people-to-people basis. Now, given that this is the Philanthropy Summit, and given that philanthropic activities are one of our biggest cornerstones, let me tell you a little bit more about what Indiaspora does in the philanthropic realm. And this could take a while, but I'll just be brief in the interest of time. Obviously, I'll give you sort of the Cliff Notes version. The thematic goal is to galvanize the Indian diaspora into greater giving to India, as well as giving in your local communities and countries of residence where you've made your success over the past 2, 3, 4 decades. I'll give you 2 or 3 very quick examples. Every year we do an online giving program called Chalo Give. And this year we did it as well with a focus on hunger relief during COVID. Through the generosity of the Indian diaspora, we managed to raise $1.2 million in about 10 days of the program going live. And we had 2 partner organizations, one in America, Feeding America, and another in India, Goonj, that are very involved in helping feed the hungry during COVID. And the money was distributed almost equally between our 2 partners, which resulted in the feeding of 8 million meals to people that might otherwise have not received them. And that is something that we are very grateful for the support of our community members, many of whom are on the line today. Another example of the work we've done is we launched a COVID report. Essentially, this was a report that focused on how the Indian diaspora has helped during COVID. And over 58 organizations were profiled in this report, a lot of them doing outstanding work in India, in the United States, just really a gathering of the community in terms of how we all rallied together to help. Now, a couple of things that you will see later in the session. We are shortly going to be releasing the Invisible Indian report with Professor Devesh Kapur of Johns Hopkins. This is a report that is meant to shine a spotlight on the underprivileged folks in the Indian diaspora here in America. Normally, we think of the Indian diaspora across the world as being successful people, which is true. But one should not ignore or neglect the fact that there are people in our community who perhaps are not quite as well off, and we are launching this report with a view to make a positive difference in their lives. Secondly, Indiaspora is proud to be a member of the IPA, India Philanthropy Alliance, and you'll see them later in the program as well. Essentially, this is an organization which comprises of 13 CEOs of philanthropic organizations in the United States that are focused on India. And we get together to discuss programmatic collaborations and how to stop working in silos. Now, just a couple of logistical items before I move forward with the agenda. There are several attendees on screen, as you can see, and all of you are on mute. Of course, you will be unmuted before your respective panel. The only request that we have is when we send you a request to unmute, you need to accept the request before being unmuted. Second, none of the panels, in the interest of time, are going to have questions. The only questions are for the two keynotes, one with Professor Kapur and the other later in the program with Vidya Shah of Edelgive Foundation. Now, with that said, let me move on to the first item on the agenda, and that is our good friend, Mary Millben. Mary is an award-winning singer and actor who has performed for 3 US presidents and at several of the nation's top sporting events. In fact, she sang the Indian national anthem a short while ago, which went viral, and tens of millions of people watched her do that. Mary will first of all be providing some brief remarks, and then we will play her song, which she's debuting the video of today, and we are very thankful that Mary's doing that with us at Indiaspora. The song's name is Let There Be Peace on Earth. So with that, good friend of Indiaspora, I'll turn it over to Mary Millben.
Hello, Sanjeev. How are you, dear?
Thank you. Great.
Great to see you. Thank you so much for that very kind and warm introduction. The most important part is that I am a friend of Indiaspora and such a big fan of all of the great work that your organization is doing. And so let me just first say thank you to you and to your boss and my friend MR and all of the Indiaspora board and family and staff. Thank you for this very, very kind and thoughtful invitation to be a part of this very meaningful summit. I tell you, I love India. I love India, the people of India, the Indian American community. You are all my new big family. And what a joy it has been to have so many beautiful interfaces through these difficult months that we're all experiencing across the world to inherit a new family. And so I am so looking forward to doing more meaningful work for good with Indiaspora. I tell you, we are living in some tough times right now, and it is the most important time for all of us to join together and find ways that we can help each other. And so the great work that you and MR and all of the team at Indiaspora, what you're doing to help so many people in need, it's remarkable. To see the amount of dollars and the attention and how you are also assembling other great philanthropic entities together with your organization to do good. And so I look forward to joining that army of doing good and working to bring hope to the world. You know, I tell you, we can all during this time, since we are experiencing this pandemic and so much together, we can all find little ways we can do good every day. And that's by all of us becoming a philanthropist in our own right, finding ways that we can connect the dots, taking our passion and marrying it to purpose. And so I look forward to doing just that, taking my love for music and my profession and marrying it to do good with Indiaspora and the great work that you're doing. So I hope to all of those watching, a hello to you. My prayers are with you during this time. And I certainly hope that this performance here today is a blessing to you, to your spirits, and is uplifting during the time that we're living in. So God bless you all, and may this bless you.
Mary, that was soulful, stirring, and powerful. And so delighted that you chose Diaspora to debut the video. We'll now move on to our next item on the agenda with Professor Devesh Kapur. Devesh is the Star Foundation Professor of South Asian Studies and the Director of the Asia Program at Johns Hopkins University. And he will be presenting a report that he authored in conjunction with Jashan Bajwa and did for Indiaspora about the invisible Indian. Essentially, like I said, this is a report that shines a spotlight on underprivileged Indian Americans and what we can do to make a positive difference about them. Devesh will speak for about 10 minutes, and after that, time permitting, we will have about 5 minutes available for questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand in the Zoom app, and I will then be moderating questions with Devesh. So with that, Devesh, over to you.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all. I think after listening to, after soaring high with Mary's magnificent voice, I'm going to sort of bring you guys down to earth with something much more prosaic. So, so this is work that I've done with a student of mine, Jashan Bajwa, who's done a lot of the data analysis. And what we try and sort of look at is the sort of reality, while on aggregate, Indian Americans have been a very successful community, but all averages have also a lot of variance, and there are highs and there are also lows. And so we're trying to sort of uncover the less visible, the less successful Indians. And that's what this analysis is about. Let's see. Don't know how to get it down. Yeah. So this analysis is based on data from the US Census, which has an annual American community survey, where about 1% of the US population is sampled every year. In the US Census, Indian Americans are sort of defined in terms of race as Asian Indians, so it's a self-identification. And among those, there's an income criteria based on the size of the household. If you are below that income criteria, you are classified as poor. And that's a very standard way that it's done everywhere. Sorry. So just to give you some ballpark figures, in 2018, about 250,000 Indian Americans were below the poverty line. That's about 6.5% of the population, which is about half the poverty rate for Americans as a whole. And these numbers are higher in the Hispanic and among Black Americans. The most common languages spoken at home in Indian American poor households are Hindi and English, but that's also because these are the most common languages spoken at home in Indian Americans in general. Relative to the share of population, the incidence of poverty is greater among Bengali and Punjabi speakers. About a third of the poor are not in the labor force, which is different from unemployment, which means they are not seeking employment. We are not sure why they are not in the labor force. We think that one part of the reason might be their immigration status. But even then, about a fifth of the poor are not US citizens. So that alone cannot explain this. What are some of their characteristics? Relative to the to the poor in America in general, they are much more likely to be married households. Poverty in America is more feminized. Among Indian Americans, however, it's the opposite. Male-led households, the incidence of poverty is sort of greater. We're not sure why that's the case. It might be there's a stigma of poverty and they do not seek help. And you see that in the fact that even though they are poor, they do not access benefits that they can access, like use food stamps. They use it much, much less. And at least self-identified disabilities in poor Indian American households are less than half in American poor households in general. Now, in the paper, we identified 4 sources of vulnerabilities relating to housing, health, food, and disabilities. Among the poor households, at least 86% face at least one of these vulnerabilities, and about a third of poor Indian American households have at least 2 of these disabilities. Where do they live? They broadly live where Indian Americans live. That's not surprising, except that relative to the general Indian American population, the Indian American poor tend to live more in rural and semi-rural areas, which is also the same with the poor in the broader American population. Unsurprisingly, there is a positive correlation between impoverished Indian Americans and unauthorized Indian Americans, that is those who don't have a legal status. The fraction of this group has actually grown quite sharply in the last decade, and there are roughly at least 500,000 unauthorized Indian Americans, although the numbers are different depending on the source of data that one uses. In the paper, we also attempt to look at the what might be the impact of COVID on poverty among Indian Americans. So we looked at the fraction of the Indian American labor force that works in so-called high-risk industries. That is, those industries that have been disproportionately and negatively affected by COVID, industries like retail, hospitality, travel, and so on. And we find that of the Indian American workers working in these industries, about a third don't have American citizenship, which means that if they are laid off, they have much less access to social benefits. Our estimate when we sort of look at these numbers is that the job losses, absence of health insurance, maybe evictions from housing, etc., that COVID, depending on the duration of this crisis, it's likely to increase poverty among Indian Americans by up to 50%, from about 6.5 to about 10% of the total Indian American population. At the end of the paper, what we do is we sort of lay out 5 strategies to sort of mitigate poverty risk. One can have a spatial strategy, which is to focus on the spatial areas where the poor Indian Americans live. A sectoral strategy, which is to target high-risk COVID-19 workers, that is, look at those industries that are at high risk, like hospitality, where Indian Americans work more. The third is a strategy that really brings and helps out through legal assistance, because many of them are going to be unauthorized workers. Many of the poor live in rental housing. If they suffer a loss of income, they face housing sort of eviction. For all of these, they need some legal help. The fourth is to really target those who are extra vulnerable. And almost for sure, what we see is an increase in sort of domestic violence, increase in mental health issues. These afflictions will much more adversely affect children, elderly, as well as the incarcerated. And so the idea is to focus particularly on these vulnerable groups. And the last, which is more of a long-term strategy, it's reasonably clear that some of the industries that have been severely affected, the jobs are not going to come back the way they were pre-crisis. So some of these workers really will have to be retrained to enter other occupations. And so strategies that could help them retrain so that they could move out of the sectors where they were working, where jobs are unlikely to come back, and move into sectors that are likely to grow more. And now that's it. We can open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Devesh. You've unearthed some really insightful things in this report. And, if we had the time, I think we could have just an entire summit on this itself. I know that there are several members of the media, as I've seen on the participant list, that are right now in the meeting room. But I don't see any specific questions right now or raised hands. So in the interest of time, let me just say to the members of the media that if you wish to speak with Devesh, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to facilitate a conversation, either tomorrow or sometime thereafter. All right. So thank you so much, Devesh, for that presentation. And I'll turn it over now to my colleague, Ashish Shah, our Director of Community Relations in Seattle.
Thanks, Sanjeev. And thank you, Devesh, for presenting the report.
Yeah,
and thank you to you and Jashan for your research on this topic. This report can now be accessed on the Indiaspora website, and the link to that will be posted very soon in the chat. Moving on to our first panel of the evening, I would like to invite Akhtar Badshah to introduce his panel and co-panelists. A little bit about Akhtar. Akhtar is an architect by training. He is also an author. He is the director of the Accelerating Social Transformation Program at the University of Washington and a former senior executive at Microsoft responsible for leading Microsoft's global philanthropy efforts for over 10 years. Akhtar, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you all very much, and thank you to Indiaspora for inviting me to be part of this. MR is a force of nature, and what he has put together is just amazing, and it was so fascinating to hear Mary and her wonderful voice and song. And I have so many questions for Professor Devesh on the report, but I thought that this might require a separate conversation. Just to set the stage, we have two fascinating panelists who are showing how individually you can come together to make change. As pointed out, we are living in an incredible time. Every community is facing challenges, and this is the time for all of us to move from our individual growth to a collective impact and to extend the common book, the common good. My book, Purpose Mindset, focuses on that, which is getting people to go beyond the growth mindset that we all in the industry know about, and using growth and growth mindset and extending it to benefit the community by creating movements for social change. Movements like Sachi, who's going to be speaking later on, has created with her entrepreneurship work, or Alex Khan, who's here in the screen, who created with the Green Foundation and working with Professor Mohammed Yunus around microfinance. So we are in this very fascinating time. So I hope that you get a chance to look at my book, which is focused on my time at Microsoft. But now let me just invite our panelists to share a few words of the work that they are doing. We have three fascinating people, Aradhana and Raj Asava, who have started this amazing effort to reduce hunger and HungerMitao in the US. Shailaja Akkapeddi, she is an independent consultant, but before that, she's actually been working for the IRC, which is the International Relief Council, and has focused on immigrants and migrants in this country. And I'm just trying to find my panelists on the screen, and Deepak Chopra, who has this organization that is focused on empowering youth to get employed with his Freedom Employability Academy. So let me ask Aradhana and Raj to start off and share a few words about the work that they're doing and why they started getting involved in this space.
Sure. Thank you, Akhtar. Thank you, Akhtar. And can you hear us okay?
Yeah, yes.
Perfect. Great. Good evening. Thank you, Indiaspora, for this opportunity for us to be able to share our passion with you all. Raj and I have lived in the USA for a collective 83 years. Collective. He came to the US 45 years ago and started out as a dishwasher and retired about 10 years ago as the Chief Strategy Officer for Perot Systems, which was acquired by Dell Services. That's a testimonial, I believe, to the fact that this truly is a land of opportunity. About 11 years ago, we decided to give up our corporate jobs to purposefully spend our limited currency, our time on this planet, doing things that we always wanted to do. Our kids were grown and they were on their own 2 feet.
and we had enough to live out our life in a desired comfort level. We both wanted to travel, see the world, spend time with aging parents and family members, and do things meaningful to us.
And then something changed.
Something changed.
About 5 years ago, we learned about the lurking hunger in America. It was apparently a huge issue.
Shocking.
Kids going to school where our children went faced hunger. Actually, our own region of North Texas was home to almost 850,000 people who were food challenged. Across US, we learned more than 40 million people needed assistance with food.
Yeah, shocking.
We were stunned about our findings.
Yeah.
We dug deeper. We learned that the stats were indeed true. We were surprised that this hunger issue had never come up in our social circles. A collective lack of awareness was the only reason we could assign this to. So if hunger was an issue in this land, there really was something we needed to do about it. Because we have adopted this land as our country, was it not our responsibility to also engage and be part of the solution? It seemed like it was not only the right thing to do, but it was also in our best interest to be seen as an engaged community.
So we decided to do something about it. An issue this pervasive needed a sustaining engagement model. We put our corporate learnings of many decades to work. My strategy background, Anna's process and system thinking guided us in the shaping of a very unique community-driven model, which we call HungerMitao. Anna and I resisted the urge to start something from scratch. Having been witness to the scale, reach, and efficiencies of the food bank system, we decided that Feeding America and the 200 food banks in its network would be an organization to put our resources and throw our support behind.
But our individual resources were limited. So we decided to start a collaborative movement. Since we had most influence in the Indian American community, we started there. We committed 3 years of our lives to the food banks.
It has already gone to 5 years, Anna.
But that's okay. We are lifetimers. We wanted that much time to stand up HungerMitao, which means wipe out hunger. This is a movement, not an organization. We would evangelize within the Indian community the need for hunger relief and the work of the food banks. We got busy organizing active volunteering, food and fund drives, because our giving needed to be unified to have an impact that would be noticeable.
That was very important. Long story short, the community loved it. The movement caught on fire. Word spread. Other food banks called us to capitalize on this unique model of community engagement. We found others who were as passionate as us and willing to lead this movement in other cities. And would you believe it? Just 2 days ago, on September 29th, we celebrated 3-year anniversary of HungerMitao by crossing a huge milestone of having enabled the Indian American community through HungerMitao, enabled 30 million meals, 30, for Feeding America and its network of food banks. So this is our passion, as you can see, and this how we got started. That's another story altogether in length. But Akhtar, I'll hand it back to you as our opening remarks, and look forward to some good Q&A. Akhtar, you're on mute.
Yes, I know I got muted, so I could not unmute myself since Rucha had to unmute me. So thank you so very much with your amazing story, Aradhana and Raj, and this is so inspiring for all of us. Let me now ask Shailaja if she can share a bit about her work and the impact that she hopes to have with what she's now planning to start.
Thank you, Akhtar, and thank you, Indiaspora, for inviting me to join this panel. An amazing story, Raj and Anna's. So my journey has been slightly different. I came to the US 30 years back to go to graduate school, and I've worked in the nonprofit sector for over 15 years now. Recently, I, like Akhtar mentioned, I worked with the International Rescue Committee and several other organizations, but more recently, I've been doing independent work. So the way I'm giving back is most of my work is skills-based volunteering, if you will. So what I'm trying to, so I'm still very connected to my two big passions really are working with resettled refugees in Salt Lake City, where I live. And also I'm very connected to the nonprofit sector in India. So, my journey started with a job, my first job at the Salt Lake Community College, where I got to work with women entrepreneurs, refugee entrepreneurs here locally, and I helped them, start and scale small businesses. And I also got an opportunity to work with an NGO in India, similar kind of a project where I went to India, traveled to India, and helped women entrepreneurs, in a marginalized community start businesses. So, this has been these are my two passions. And like Mary mentioned, and very rightly so, I'm trying to marry my passion with purpose. And this is what I've been doing for a while now. So a couple of projects that I worked during COVID, I can talk, just to tell you what I do. I worked with an NGO, community-based organization in India, and I helped them. They were trying to assess the impact of COVID on their marginalized community, which is primarily made of Dalits and Muslims and migrants. So they were trying to assess the impact of the lockdown on gender-based violence in their community. So I was able to help them do a gender analysis because that's part of my background. I was able to create a framework and analyze their interview data and things like that. On the local scene, I worked with the International Rescue Committee recently during COVID and helped refugee entrepreneurs who were trying to start a home-based childcare program. So I built a training workshop for them and during COVID and helped them get their businesses started. All this via Zoom, which was kind of interesting by itself because these women, on the one hand, we were trying to start them with businesses. They did not even have devices, and we were trying to go online with them. So we had to get them devices, computers, laptops, teach them how to use Zoom, and then get on the work, and do the workshops. So it was an interesting process, but it was successful. So that's kind of a couple of projects that I worked on. And I also am involved with the First Generation Scholarship Program. So I work with a local university and the students there. I have 4 mentors. I'm on the board, and I also have 4 mentors with refugee backgrounds. I'm trying to help them get through their education successfully by supporting them. And a lot of stuff has come up during the COVID period, and I was able to help them. And maybe I'll speak about that later when I get an opportunity with other questions. Back to you, Akhtar.
Shailaja, thank you so much. Let me move on to Deepak Chopra. Deepak, could you just share your work and what drives you to do this?
Thank you. Happy to, and hello, everyone. Freedom Employability Academy. So as the name suggests, we are about employability as opposed to education. What we do is focus on disadvantaged youth in a very specific age group, late teens, early 20s. This is the time in somebody's life when they make career choices and decisions they make then, they kind of end up living with for the rest of their lives. So we've been developing programs for youth that has not really received a high quality education because for no fault of theirs, they were born in low-income families. And essentially going through life without much of an education really, really handicaps you. So we operate in about 12 different cities in North India. We have about a little more than 100 branches where the students come in for classes every day, 6 days a week for a year. In that 1 year, we don't teach them stuff. The big thing that we teach is learning how to learn, becoming adaptable, being able to communicate, collaborate, work in teams, ethics, the importance of ethics, the importance of giving back, the importance of having a sense of community. Along with that and other such personal skills, or they're also called non-cognitive skills, we build English language skills to a level that makes you effective in the workplace. Because again, it's all about employability. And then the last thing that we work on is getting our students
adept at using online resources. So if you think about a girl living in a slum in Mathura, which is a small town in India, for those of you that may not have heard of the name, she has very few resources, but we've helped her figure out a way to do an online course offered by Stanford University. We built in her the persistence and the determination to stick with it, even though it's hard, it's challenging, but she's figured she has a self-confidence and the determination to stick with it and go all the way through. We're a team of about 600 people. We have the capacity to educate about 32,000 students every year. And we're growing at the rate, we're growing before the wind got knocked out of our sails by the pandemic, but it'll come back. We're finding anecdotally that our program enables youth to double and triple their income, and in some cases even quadruple their income. So that's a pretty significant outcome. And in fact, researchers from Stanford University are conducting a randomized control trial to evaluate the impact of the program, because if it works as well as it appears to be, then it's a model that perhaps many others might find interesting. Akhtar, you said 3 minutes, so I'll shut up now. Back to you.
Deepak, thank you very much. And again, just fascinating work. And I'd love to see the studies that come out. Let me just go back to Shailaja and Ashish. We have probably time for a few minutes to ask a couple of questions. And Shailaja, you kind of left us hanging by not giving us an example of people that you have touched. And I would love for you to, give us a couple of examples of the impact that you've had.
Yeah, so one of my earliest memories working with a local resettled refugee family was, I helped them, they were getting ready for their citizenship test. And so I used to go bi-weekly to their home and teach them civics classes to get ready for their citizenship test. And these are people, they were a Burmese family. They did not really know much, they didn't have much English at all, but they were studying this for this test. And we worked on it for 3 months, I think, and they did pass the test. They got their citizenship, and I got to be part of their swearing-in ceremony, which was very, very special. So, these are the kinds of things why I do what I do. With my first generation scholars, during COVID, 2 of the girls, actually, I'll talk about one, her whole family lost employment because, they were working as janitors and other different jobs. And she is only 20 years old, but she is essentially had to be the adult in the family because she's the only one who speaks English, who knows how to communicate, pick up the phone and talk to the different government agencies and things like that. And for a 20-year-old, that's a lot. And, so she would call me. So I was her support person. So she'd call me pretty much every day, to fill in things like, how do you do unemployment? How do you file for unemployment and things like that. So just being able to be there for her as a mentor. I had another girl, one of my other girls, one of her family members had COVID, and she, again, being 19, she still had to be the adult in the family and step up and take care of, just communicating with hospitals, driving, everything, because the rest of the family members don't do any of that. And since she's the first person to go to college and understands the system, she's expected to do it, and which she did, but she also needs support. She's only 19 years old. And again, I was able to help them. Both of them come from refugee families. So, these are the kinds of things that I'm able to help with. And it's why I do what I do. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Aradhana and Raj, you crossed 30 million meals served? Tell us a little more about what has been that impact on individuals, and then what might be an ask from this gathering of 90 people of how they might continue to support what you're doing.
Great. Thank you, Akhtar. First and foremost, through 30 million meals that just the Indian community has done over the last 3 years, you'll be surprised to know that Feeding America and their network of food banks provide billions of meals during the same time frame. So we are really a very small part of the fantastic work that Feeding America and their food banks are doing. And majority of these stories, the success stories, you may call it, where, it's expected that after COVID, or as we are going through COVID, 40% of United States, 40% of people will not know where the next meal is coming from, right? So thank goodness for Feeding America and their network of food banks. And they have numerous stories. There's a bank of stories. So we don't necessarily get to hear directly from what they call the client. But interesting thing I want to share with you, that we believe through HungerMitao, we are addressing both sides of the equation. For example, not just the feeding people who are in need, but interesting thing we are finding is that those from the Indian community, once they realize that the hunger issue is huge over here, and they get engaged through HungerMitao for volunteering, for food drive, for funds drive, etc., they are finding that to be very satisfying. Youth to senior citizens are getting involved in this thing. And several people have told us, and I mean in hundreds, right, Anna?
Yeah.
Several people have told us that their dinner conversation has changed. The children no longer talk about the new iPhone. They don't talk about the video games. Having been out there and volunteering, they are now asking, and they're quizzing their parents, we have plenty. How can we help those who are in need? So that to Anna and I is very, very satisfying.
I think that's the most gratifying thing around, totally.
Yeah.
The engagement is very gratifying.
Well, thank you very much. And going back to Deepak, your story about this girl from Mathura being able to actually do an online course on Stanford, I think is just fascinating. But you probably have some examples of how people's lives have been transformed because of what you have done to get people employed or on a livelihood path.
If you look at our website, there's a video clip of this young man in Agra who talks about the fact that growing up, he frequently had only one meal a day. In the video, he walks us through his father's tea shop because his father is a tea seller to date. That's what he does even now. This young man has started his own business as a photographer and has employees now. So that's a pretty dramatic change for someone that had food issues. I've had, because of the number of students that have gone through our program, we just have countless stories like this of lives being transformed. Yesterday, out of the blue, this young man called me up to ask some questions, but turns out he's an FEA graduate who's made his way to the US, and he's gotten into college over here, has whatever going on helping him out, and he has a part-time job. And he comes from a place called Village Naya Bans. If you Googled it and looked at the images of that village, you kind of see this isn't what you would expect a person from this village would end up doing.
Thank you. So let me just end. I know that we have used up more of our time, but just first of all, thanking all of you for your amazing work, your amazing stories, and the commitment just to the broader community. Purpose and finding purpose that allows you to move what you know, the wealth, and it's not just money, but the wealth that you as an individual bring, your intellect and your connections, can make a huge difference. And if we all did that in this time, where so many people are stepping up, and yet there is such a need, I think as a community of Indians, the diaspora here can truly make a massive change. So thank you all very much for listening to us. And Ashish, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity, and back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Akhtar. And thank you, Anna and Raj, Shailaja, and Deepak for a great panel. 4 amazing examples of diaspora giving. Thank you for everything you all are doing, really. Thank you very much. Before we move on to our next panel, let's take a short break and look at some amazing diaspora images from all around the world with Preston Merchant. Preston is an Indiaspora friend and supporter. He teaches photography at Columbia University and was a featured artist in the Smithsonian Institution's exhibit Beyond Bollywood, Indian Americans Shape the Nation. Preston, over to you.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me? I'm going to try to share my screen here. It says host disabled. There we go. Trying to make this work. Apologies for the moment. I'm deeply sorry about my inability to get this going. Let me just, I'm going to jump off and come right back.
Ashish, in the interest of time, if you can we proceed with the next panel and then have Preston later?
Yeah, I think he just joined. Let's give it another 10 seconds, and if not, we can move on. Okay, let's move on to our next panel, which happens to be an all West Coast panel. I would like to invite Sri Rajan to introduce his panel and the co-panelists. A little bit about Sri. Sri is an Indiaspora member and a partner at Bain & Company. Sri was the former chairman and managing director of Bain's India offices. He is currently the vice chairman of Akshayapatra USA. Akshayapatra, as you all know, or as you all probably know, is the largest NGO-run school meal program in the world. Sri, welcome, and let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ashish, and thank you to Indiaspora for this event. It was actually very inspiring to hear the stories of the people who have given so much back, both over here and in India. I'm not going to spend too much time introducing the fellow panelists. I just briefly talk about them. But let me assure you that they are a stellar group of people who have done a lot in the area of giving. So let me start with Sumir, who's a co-founder and MD of WestBridge Capital. He's given a lot over the years to various causes, and at least a couple that I know of. One is, of course, Akshayapatra, and the other is Olympic Gold Quest. The second is Stephanie, who is the Director of Impact-Driven Philanthropy Initiative at the Raikes Foundation. And then Ankur Vora, who's the Chief Strategy Officer of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. As I mentioned, I'm not going to go through their bios in a great amount of detail, primarily because it's a very long list of accomplishments that each of them has. I would urge you to go and click on the link to see what they have done over the years. But trust me that this is actually a stellar group of people to talk on this topic. What we're going to do is to talk a little bit about what's changed, especially over the course of the last 6 months. And what a year it's been. I think everyone would generally feel that this is a year that needs to be in the rearview mirror pretty soon. We really can't deal too much more with, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a racial unrest, whether it's fires, natural calamities around the world, whatever that might be. And we're really going to talk about what does this all mean? What has changed in the area of giving, in the area of philanthropy? And so what I'd like to do is to really start with Stephanie. So Stephanie, what are the changes that you have seen in the overall giving space over the course of the last 6 months? And give us a sense of at the overall macro level, and then we can dig a little deeper in the subsequent questions.
I will start by just saying thank you to everyone for inviting me and including me, and how fun it is to see so many familiar faces. Here because in my job, I actually am a bit of a philanthropy nerd. I've spent my whole career thinking about this field and how to support people to give in ways that are meaningful and can make a real difference. And 2019, to your question, Shri, as we headed into 2020, before we knew what was all coming, 2019, we were kind of tying the strings around, and it was a strong year in the US for giving. The overall giving was up 2.4% in 2019. We came into this year thinking that we were in a good space, especially many of the organizations. That said, 2020 is unprecedented, as we all know, and the challenges that we face. And there has been a strong philanthropic response, both from individuals and from organized philanthropy, and perhaps a belated awakening to the impact of race and racism on just about every issue in the social sector. So we've seen shifts in how we're giving. The rise in mutual aid, give directly to individuals, including direct cash transfers and cash giving, a big rise in collaborative giving, pooling our funds together, funds launched at foundations or intermediaries or other community-based organizations that are pooling our dollars and then re-granting to people and organizations in the communities. And then finally, a real growth in voluntarism and activism, how we're using our time. And all of those things have been really heartening. We think about the overall philanthropic response in our work. We think about it in kind of three big phases. There's immediate relief in the wake of a disaster where you're providing food aid, as the Asawas have highlighted, organizations like Feeding America really stepping up to meet the immediate needs of communities, PPE in this crisis, other things like that. Then there's a rebound phase eventually that we get to where we're working to develop the vaccine, for example, and expand broadband now that we realize that all our children are going to be learning at home. And then finally, eventually we get to a reimagine and restructure. What are the opportunities we have in the wake of these multiple forces in our country right now to think differently about how our systems work and what's most needed? I'm going to pause there.
Okay, wonderful. And we'll come back to some of these themes, Stephanie, especially around, some interesting ideas around pooling, what you're seeing in terms of volunteerism and activism, and also which phase in the three phases are we. Ankur, let me turn to you. If you can give us your perspective in your role as a Chief Strategy Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You obviously have an overview. You obviously have a direct impact in terms of a large pool of capital, but also, I would imagine, a pretty good overview in terms of what's happening in the philanthropic sector. What are you seeing? What's been the big shift in 2020 at a macro level compared to previous years?
Yes, pleasure being here. And as everybody would probably agree with, 2020 is a year that we probably want to put behind us on various fronts. But there have been, as they say, like at every, there's always a silver lining somewhere. And one of the silver linings has been giving has gone up. 90% of donors have said that either they've kept their level of funding or they've increased it. If you look at small donors, they've gone up. The collectives that Stephanie talked about, they've gone up. Just the number of funds, like for people who are focused in India, there are like multiple funds. There are multiple funds in the US, like Power Off, or in India, the Combat India COVID Relief Fund. So there are just many of these that have increased and giving has gone up, which is kind of lovely. The other thing that's also been interesting and good, and it's, again, there's a dark side to it and there's a silver lining to it, which is COVID has increased a fair amount, has surfaced a fair amount of issues around gender violence or intimate partner violence, which, funding had been increasing and focus had been increasing on it over a while. But I've been hearing so many stories about just a major push in terms of trying to understand and address those issues. So those have gone up. And so that's been great. there's the dark side of all of these things is that if you look at the statistics, 1.6 million jobs in the US in the nonprofit sector were lost between March and May, mostly in health and education. 2/3 of African nonprofits believe that their funding is going to go down. 16% of Indian NGOs think they may not be able to run in 12 months because they just don't have enough capital. And so there is a bit of the macro level of funding has gone up, which is nice, but the needs have gone up significantly faster. And so net, what we're seeing is a massive shortfall. So if, there are many donors on this call, if you were ever waiting for a moment to think that this is where you want the impact of your funds, the impact of your giving to be high, this is the moment. This is probably the moment for us in our times where every dollar, every rupee is going to matter a lot. And if people want to know how to give and where to give, there are many ideas out there, and I'm happy to share some of the avenues, but just this is the moment for all of us to pitch in.
Thank you, Ankur. And I want to come back to you, subsequently, and I want you to sort of put it together for us, as you talked about. If the amount of money is going up, but at the same time, you're seeing a large number of NGOs struggling, where is that money going, right? I want you to come back and, for you and Stephanie to tell us what's happening over there. Sumir, I want to turn to you. You are known as a philanthropic donor across a range of causes. And I want you to tell us at a personal level, at an individual level, what's changed for you, in 2020 compared to 2019?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, I just want to, Shri, thank Indiaspora for this fantastic philanthropy event. They've done a great job. And Shri, thank you for moderating our panel. I would say 2 or 3 things have changed, Shri, to your question. One thing that's changed, picking up on something that Ankur was saying, I'm not surprised that small donors like me have increased our giving because the need has never been greater. So if I look at India today, one of the big challenges, as we all know, has been that the lockdown has really impacted India disproportionately compared to other countries because 80% of our labor force is informal income. So, for most of us, for many of us, I shouldn't say, but most of us in the US, we get a salary. As long as we keep our jobs, we get a salary whether there's a lockdown or not. We may be sitting at home, but we get a salary. In India, there was such a huge loss of income among such a large part of the underprivileged group population that, I think one thing I feel, Shri, is the need's never been higher. Mm-hmm. And I think that's definitely my firm and I were giving more than we've ever given because of that higher need. And a sense of what Ankur was saying, that the time is now. So fully agree with that. I think the second thing that's changed, and then I'll hand back to you, Shri, to continue panel discussion. Second thing that's changed is the way that both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations succeed. There was a way to succeed pre-COVID, maybe having a development team or development staff for a not-for-profit, calling on a lot of people. That model is obviously broken. The whole high touch ability is gone thanks to COVID. Mm-hmm. And I see the not-for-profits that are succeeding are the ones that understand that the world has changed and adapting to it. It creates a lot of challenges, but one of the great opportunities that I see today with the smart not-for-profits is we actually all have a lot of time on our hands thanks to COVID. Most of us donors, we're not traveling anymore, right? We're stuck at home, so we're available anytime. And so I think there's an opportunity for younger not-for-profits to kind of reach out a lot more, and people will be a lot more available to listen than, frankly, in normal times when everyone's so busy. I mean, people are still busy now, but I think that's one thing I would just encourage a lot of younger not-for-profits to do, to just be a lot more upfront and take advantage of the fact that Zoom makes it so efficient and across borders and without travel and all of that. And I don't see enough not-for-profits doing that. So it doesn't surprise me, the point that was made that many of them are struggling, because I think also the industry has not, I shouldn't call it industry, but to some extent the not-for-profit community hasn't adapted fast enough, I think, to COVID. And it's really hurting fundraise. It's really hurting the potential that's out there,
And Sumir, let me stay with you for a minute, right? So you talked about the fact that, in 2020, the amount of money that you're giving or WestBridge is giving has gone up. Give us a sense of where is it going, and has your pie chart changed from 2019 to 2020? Have the causes changed?
Yeah, pretty much we have added 2 new ones, but we've maintained the current portfolio plus 2 new ones. And the 2 new ones we've added are one in the area of supporting child workers in India, and one actually in the area of promoting better chess players in India. So 2 very different kinds of not-for-profits. So those 2 we've added, and partly it depends on what people at the firm are, what speaks to them. We try to amplify those voices.
Got it. Stephanie, let me come back to you. So tell me a little bit about the difference in terms of your giving, your allocations, right, between 2019 and 2020. Give me a sense of what's the difference over there.
Yeah, so our foundation, the Raikes Foundation, works in the areas of student education and student and youth homelessness in particular. And so we have kind of been both responding horizontally within the issue areas we work in, putting new lenses onto that work and trying to lean into where COVID and the movement for Black Lives and other forces have exposed gaps. At the same time, we've launched new giving initiatives. So we launched a COVID response fund early in Seattle, was at the forefront. And so we had the opportunity to both give to what the Seattle Foundation was doing and to launch our own efforts to respond. Similarly, we had we created a Black Leadership Empower Fund where we were able to really invest in the leadership of communities of color. And we began working more across our silos. So thinking about if we have an education program, have youth homelessness, we knew very well that one of the hardest hit populations was going to be homeless students trying to learn with very few resources and no place to call home. And so we immediately set up a collaborative effort to begin aggregating pooled funds and responding to that crisis in Washington State in partnership with many others.
Got it. Ankur, and what about you? Where are you seeing the allocations change as you look at your giving?
Yeah, and I'll also tie that into your other question about why are nonprofits struggling at a point where giving is going up so much? So we've probably, the numbers are unclear right now because we're still in the midst of it, but north of $500 million giving has increased. And most of that giving at the Gates Foundation is sort of, I'd say a majority of it is in the R&D space. Okay. So a lot of it has gone into vaccine development, new therapeutics development, diagnostics development. A chunk of it has gone into sort of making sure that and I'm sure everybody knows this and people are reading this, but a lot of the vaccine supply is getting cornered by the developed world. And so the US, the UK, the Frances, and the Germanys of the world, and they're putting a lot of money in, but they're effectively trying to make sure that their populations get covered. And one of the things we are doing with a whole bunch of other players is trying to carve out enough supply for the lower middle income countries. And so that's been a big chunk of the push. There's also just been a lot of work. And again, back to the point Sumir was making about livelihoods have been lost in this process. And in a country like US, we have the ability, the federal government has the ability to do a $2 trillion relief package to kind of, but you go to India, you go to other countries in Africa, just the fiscal space is not there. And so that's the place where a lot of philanthropy has stepped in to say, okay, we're going to come in and play the role of providing social protection in places where just governments don't have the ability to do that. So a lot of funding has gone into that. And if I just think about, we're working with a lot of Indian partners, and some of them are the Indian diaspora has played a role in it. But like if you just think about the Tatas and the Nilekanis and the Piramals of the world, like they've all put like hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's all going towards stuff that just in 2019 was not a cost center. And so you're spending a lot more money, but it's going to things that just are new needs in the world.
And Ankur, you know, there are clearly new needs that have been discovered in 2020 because of the pandemic, right? So there's a lot of money that's going into healthcare areas that, as you mentioned, it could be vaccine development, it could just be PPEs, as Stephanie talked about. So there are a whole bunch of areas. What is your sense of what's happening to the old causes? And I'm using the word old causes sort of very deliberately, right? But these are causes that still have a need. Yeah. You know, the point that you made about 1.6 million jobs gone in the non-for-profit sector, it's not that the need that these jobs or these people were sort of fulfilling. It's not that the need has gone away. What's happened to the old causes, so to speak?
Yeah, no, they're all struggling across the board. And so if I just take an example of health, which is the place where I know a little bit more about, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about education also, but just health. Measles campaigns, measles vaccination campaigns. You know, it's one of the biggest deltas in terms of lives saved. And over the course of the last 6 to 9 months, because health systems in Africa have basically shut down, and nobody wants to go to a health post because, you know, there's an increased risk, and the health workers are not there, and the supplies are not there. We've meaningfully increased the risk of a measles outbreak and a whole bunch of increased mortality in under 5 lives. Some estimates are that it may actually be higher than the lives we're losing because of COVID. And so there's just a series of these things where there were great things that were happening in the world. And so and Bill and Melinda put this letter out every year as part of a Goalkeepers report. And this is probably the first year. If you look at the trends over the course of the last 20 years, the world has just been doing great in terms of reducing the number of children under the age of 5 that die. This is the first year we're probably going to see a reversal in trend. And that's just because of the fact that the old causes are not getting enough attention. And some of it is because there's not enough funding, but some of it is just our ability to work on it is just constrained with all of the lockdowns.
Got it. So Ankur, I'm going to repeat one thing that you said. I'm going to repeat it often on this conversation, which is don't wait, right? Don't wait to give. If you're looking for a perfect time, this is not going to be a perfect time, but this is as good a time as any. Sumir, I want to come to you. You know, you talked about an increase in giving this year, right? What is your sense of, you know, as you think about your personal philosophy, is your sense that in 2021, let's assume that the pandemic goes away, who knows if it will or not, but let's assume, let's be optimistic, it goes away. Are you going to snap back to what let's say, what it was in 2019, either in terms of total dollars and rupees, and also the places where you gave the money, or is your sense that, you know what, this is what it's going to be like for the next few years?
Yeah, definitely, Shri. Great question. I think that I would say 2 or 3 things, and I'll speak more to individual donors like myself and my firm. I think a lot of it depends clearly on individual financial circumstances and how capacity changes. I think the one good news is that, you know, most of donors' wealth, or a huge amount of donors' wealth, is tied to the stock market ultimately. And while at the beginning of the pandemic, the S&P 500 is down dramatically, the reality is now it's up for the year, despite the pandemic, as we all know. And particularly if you're a tech executive at one of the big 5, your stock might, you know, at Amazon or Microsoft, your stock is actually up like 50%. So your wealth went up actually dramatically. So even though COVID is sort of, unfortunately, so negatively impacted a lot of lower income folks in India, actually for a lot of the donors, COVID's been pretty good. And so there's certainly, I would say, point 1, Shri, is a larger capacity among a lot of donors. Of course, it's individual circumstances, but I would say by and large, capacity has increased and the need has increased. So my strong expectation is, like Ankur was saying, that sort of the amount of donations gone up in 2020. We'll clearly have to see what the markets do in 2021 and how that affects people's sort of mood and wealth levels. But if things were even to stay sort of flattish from here, I think I don't see a reason why it would go down next year. I think it would be flat to up again because people do see the need. The need is not going away. Like Ankur was also saying, and Stephanie was alluding to, India doesn't have the fiscal capacity to strongly respond the way the US has, so that sort of buffering is not going to come from the government. So my strong expectation, Sri, would be that, as long as it's sort of not a major down in the markets, I think next year will be sort of even stronger than this year in terms of giving.
Got it. That actually is, it's a very hopeful outlook. So I'm hoping that will turn out to be true.
I hope so too. That's our plan, at least. Yeah, I hope so.
We are all hopeful because a world in which the stock market would have crashed with the increased needs, because philanthropy needs to be countercyclical, but it never is as countercyclical as we want it to be. And so it's just been great that we've at least, that has been one thing going in our favor.
Great.
Yeah, and I do think some of that also is because we've had giving vehicles that maybe we haven't always had historically in big disasters. The growth of donor advised funds in particular as a way that people give had these kind of resources that were already set aside for a philanthropic purpose. And so we did see big increases from all of those major financial institutions that hosted those donor advised funds because they are filling that the money was set aside, it was there, and it's not right now as market sensitive. So that was an upside. But I will also say that to Sumir's point, yes, and it is hard because this multiple crisis that we're facing has exacerbated the wealth inequality in our country. And it was already trending that way, but it's become even more stark as people who were contract workers, people who were driving Ubers, people who were perhaps working in theaters and other things have lost their jobs immediately. And the market continues to accumulate. That's going to be a challenge, I think, in the longer term in the marathon for our democracy.
And Stephanie, I was going to go there in any case, but could you talk a little bit about where there are still major gaps in terms of needs? And I know your sphere is primarily in the US, but even if you could talk to that, for the people, who are listening and watching you. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I'd love to, and I will apologize because I do have that US lens. Our work is focused here, but I mentioned earlier on the 3 phases of disaster response and how we think about that. And you at the time were saying, oh, how are we doing on that? Most of the data we have, we being our platform Giving Compass, we have aggregated many of these funds that have emerged that are opportunities for donors to give in a pooled way toward a cause. And we have, over 700, I think now, or there are over 800 that have been created. I think we have 500 some, which are open to individual donors. And we see the majority of those, 80%, some more than that, are focused on that early relief phase, responding to the immediate crisis. And maybe another small proportion are going to the rebound, but there's very few, maybe 27 total out of the 700 last I looked, were at that reimagine and restructure. And when we think about the marathon that we're going to be in as a country and responding to all of what's happening, I do think that that's where we have an opportunity and that there are some gaps. What can we do as we think about the ways that COVID has shown us some of the fissures and kind of rocky ground in our country to, for example, build advocacy power for organizations to push for policy change that will really be a lever in the future, or to invest in building the political and economic power of communities of color that have really been disproportionately affected. So those are the places where I see real opportunity now.
Got it. And Ankur, from your perspective, do you want to talk about India maybe more specifically, given the audience we have, and and talk to where there might be the biggest gaps.
Yeah, and let me keep it at a more conceptual level, and then if people are interested at some point, we can go to the more concrete. But the 4 or 5 big areas, livelihoods, it's just been hit so much, and I can't repeat it enough times at the point that Sumir made. 80% of India is informal. Lockdowns, just nobody has a bank account or enough savings to get them through a rainy day. There are lots of organizations helping people in this world. That's just a big, but the gap is so much larger than anything that's coming in. And so that's one big area. Health, it's surprising given how much money is going into health in this, that it still is a big gap. And it's the kind of things that I said, is the health systems have shut down. And so, we in India, we pushed for saying people should deliver in facilities and should access all services in the healthcare facilities. But the healthcare facilities are just not, they're starting again, but they're constrained. And so there's a big need over there. Gender equality, I alluded to that in the beginning, but that's a major thing. Mm-hmm. All crisis, all of these issues are almost always sort of biased against women. This one has been too. It's true in terms of sort of gender violence. It's true in terms of livelihood lost. And so just there is a massive need over there. And so that's probably the third one. And the fourth one I'd go to is education. And we all have children who are sort of out of schools or not learning. And the learning levels, in India, there are some, and Sri, this more than anybody else, but like the foundational learning and numeracy is just low. And some numbers are stark, as bad as 55% of kids are falling behind from a level that, it's just very foundational. And that's going to get worse. And so there are many organizations that are focused on trying to make sure that kids don't fall off the learning ladder. And that's been great, but there are areas to focus over there. And there are organizations that are working directly with beneficiaries, and there are organizations that are working with government. And so you kind of say, like, am I going to go direct, or am I going to work with sort of the big vehicle and work through them? And then there are some organizations that are kind of looking ahead. And this is the education one that's exciting, is where some people are saying that again, back to some silver lining, that this is actually increasing the pace of adoption, or the pace of our ability to provide better education to many through hybrid models. And so that's shifting. And so there's a world in which the needs over there are just going to increase a lot.
Great. And I should mention that, I personally, I think, Ankur, you were referencing this, but I've been personally involved in this whole area of foundational learning and numeracy in India. The new education policy that was announced a month or two ago, they've created a foundational learning and numeracy mission in India to really make sure that children up to the ages of, let's say, 0 to grade 3 have the ability to really build a strong foundation, which I think is a very exciting mission. Sumir, I'm going to turn to you for the last word. And this is, a lot of people in the audience who would like to know, as you look at causes that you select, I understand you talked about the fact that some of your partners may have picked up one cause or another, but beyond the specific causes, what are you looking for in organizations? How do you pick an organization to back and to give money to? And has that changed? You mentioned one of the changes, which is that, you expect them to be more digital in the COVID era than they were maybe even 6 months ago. So tell us a little bit about how do you select a cause, or actually more specifically an organization that you would pick to back?
Yeah, well, we are neophytes compared to Ankur and Stephanie, who have far more experience than I do. But I will say this, that our approach has been, number one, I think pick a cause that speaks to someone, either myself or one of my colleagues, and I think that someone feels passionately about within our firm or personally if we're giving it personally. Number two would be trying to really make sure that organizations are run for a deep impact and very leanly. And so we look for those things. And then third, I would say,
and by lean, you mean like you look at things like cost to revenue or cost to fundraised ratios and stuff like that?
Yes, very much so. We look at, because we obviously have, we're not as big as a foundation. We're tiny, we're small donors. So we want to really make sure our money goes as far as possible. So we really look for organizations that are really incredibly cost efficient in delivering the benefit to the beneficiaries, and very thoughtful about how to use limited capital to do that. So as much of it can go to the end beneficiary as possible. And so we look at some of those efficiency metrics, Sri. And then the last thing I would say is just really focus on good governance, try to get a sense for what kind of people are the leaders of the organization and what kind of people are involved at the board level. If we see someone like you on a tree, we get very excited, I would say, not to flatter, but we like to see good governance. I'd say those are some of the things that matter to us that we tend to look for, but frankly, we're early in our journey and we're learning. We've just embarked on this journey the last 4 or 5 years. So we're new to it compared to Ankur and Stephanie.
And Sumir, you keep talking about yourself being a small donor. I must tell you, I know the various causes that you give to, and you have deep impact across a whole range of causes.
You're kind, but we're not the Gates Foundation. But thank you.
Yes, not everyone can be the Gates Foundation. So we've come to the end. Sorry. So we've come to the end of our panel discussion. So thank you so much, Stephanie, Ankur, and Sumir, for a wonderful, wonderful discussion. I hope people who are listening, watching, took away some key points. For me, the main one was don't wait. Don't wait. Give now, right? There's no better time to give than now. And so there is no perfect time. It's not going to come. It's not going to come in 3 months. It's not going to come in 2 years. Give now. People are hurting. People need the money, and give now. So thank you all. I'm going to turn it back to Indiaspora, and thank you for hosting this event.
Thank you, Sri. And thank you, Stephanie, Ankur, and Sumir, for sharing your thoughts and perspective on this very important topic. Some really great information and some really good examples. Thank you again. Let's go back to Preston Merchant and look at his collection of diaspora images. Preston, I believe you're back.
Can you hear me now? Great. I apologize for my security settings from before, but I'm going to share pictures from my project called India World, in which I've spent almost 20 years photographing the global Indian diaspora. Lots of different countries and lots of different themes, and we'll talk about these for about 10 minutes. I would start here with a picture from Williamsburg, Brooklyn in 2008. At the time, Williamsburg had become the hipster capital of America, and it was fascinating to me that Desi culture, second generation Indian American culture, had a role in creating that sort of youth culture movement that we associate with Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It was a small window for all this. The prices for rents became quite high after that, but I was proud to be able to photograph a bit in that space at the time. This is Sikh Appreciation Night at the Sacramento Kings game. There are Sikh farmers in the Sacramento area and the Central Valley of California that have been farming there for about 100 years. And the local NBA franchises wanted to attract a fan base that hadn't always been associated with basketball. And so having a Dole player at center court during halftime was a way to do that. This is Asif Karim, captain of Kenya's national cricket squad. I photographed him in 2007. He competed in the 99 and 2003 World Cups. Interesting to meet him and his family. He's now a property developer, but his sort of distinction in cricket, having been man of the match for a match he lost, but playing for a nation that did not support cricket the way a lot of the rest of the Commonwealth does, still able to do well in his career there. These are Sikh women who are picking blueberries on the outskirts of Vancouver in the town of Abbotsford. They work as agricultural support labor in these plantations that are owned oftentimes by Sikh investors and entrepreneurs. But they pick berries even though many of them are elderly, and they do so because they get to spend time with their peers. They can speak Punjabi, they can contribute financially to their families. Otherwise, they're living in suburbia, and this is a way that they can reduce their isolation and contribute. This is Ishita Malavia, who has the distinction of being India's first female professional surfer, with running a surf school in Manipal. And she was on a surfing safari and came to California, where I live now, and met some local surfers. This is from Woolgoolga, Australia, which is north of Sydney on the Gold Coast, in an area where Sikhs in the 1940s began taking up banana farming and have done so and been very successful at it, and built their temples and gurdwaras and other facilities, and are very prosperous there. In 2007, the India Tourism Board built a replica of the Taj Mahal in Bryant Park in New York to celebrate India's, which was the 60th anniversary of independence. And there were cultural shows and other events there in Midtown Manhattan. Daisylicious was a South Asian themed LGBTQ event held monthly in New York for a time. I don't know if it's still going on, but part of the subculture and the culture expression of folks there. Surrey Fusion Festival. I'll share a few pictures here of Hema Ramaswamy, who at the time was living in Middletown, New Jersey. She's a young woman with Down syndrome, and she's had a remarkable run of good events in her life. She and her date here, Justin Hagen, were crowned king and queen of their high school prom. You see them there with their crowns and enjoying their dance. Hema is also an accomplished dancer. Her aunt in Chennai is a teacher and was part of her education. And Hema here is practicing to give a performance of Bharatanatyam in Chennai. This is on a rooftop in Basant Nagar. And she gave a performance there, and then we went out to the beach to photograph her in her costume with her makeup. I wanted to capture a bit of what Chennai looks like on the beach there with her and her accomplishments. She's thought to be the first Indian American woman with Down syndrome to have completed an Arangetram. And her family is in Texas now, and here she is in the center. These are her cousins and her nieces, and she's there with 4 generations of family celebrating one of her niece's birthdays. There is a high school out here in the Bay Area, south of San Jose, in the town of Watsonville, called Mount Madonna School. And it's an outgrowth of a yoga center that was founded by an Indian holy man in the 70s as a yoga center. And the school has put on for the last 40-odd years a production of the Ramayana, in which the entire school body has a role on stage at some point with costumes and dance and music. And it's a rather remarkable presentation that I've enjoyed photographing every year. Another scene from that Ramayana musical, the monkey army here. I believe this is Sugriva here in the Che Guevara t-shirt. Some of the music and the lyrics are consistent with a Marxist theme, power to the people. The monkeys espousing this here on the stage. And of course, Ravana, one of the students had adapted the music, taking some cues from Hamilton to produce a sort of rap monologue that Ravana would give at one point in the show. And this is that character doing that. In the Caribbean, Trinidad, I photographed in a fishing village there. There are Indians in the Caribbean who had worked as indentured laborers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and their descendants are still there, of course. South Asians for Obama event in New York on the Upper East Side in 2008. He was Senator Obama then, and you'll notice that his hair is still sort of dark and not gray. Moving to Brighton in the United Kingdom. This is the Royal Pavilion, which was built as a seaside residence for several monarchs, including Victoria. And it did serve as a military hospital during World War I. And there were taking care of wounded from the rest of the empire, including lots of soldiers from India. And a few more pictures from Britain. A filmmaker that I met, Aryan Singh. The batter for pakoras made into snacks, mass production in Southall. And this is the Lord Mayor of Leicester. Manjula Sood was the first woman South Asian to attain this title in Britain. Not every town has a Lord Mayor. Most have regular mayors, but there are 10 or so Lord Mayors of Britain. And they are the first citizen of their communities, sort of ambassador, spokesperson, meeting with constituents. They do a lot of the serving as the face of their communities. Back to Brooklyn, continuing my theme of the sort of Desi culture that was out there in Williamsburg. Some houses in South Africa near where Gandhi had set up his Phoenix settlement near Durban. A cricket camp in Dubai. The Pagua Parade, which is the Caribbean community, those folks from Guyana and Trinidad, they call Holi. They refer to it as Pagua. And on the streets of New York, they play Holi with the colors and the powder. And a scene from one of the United Arab Emirates, Al Quwain, which is up about a couple hours from Dubai. But we know Dubai for its glamour and glitz and big buildings and rather elaborate amusement parks. And there's some smaller ones in the other Emirates that cater to the local communities. The Miss India Teen Georgia pageant in Atlanta a few years ago. I'm going to jump ahead to some things here and we'll bring this to a conclusion. I wanted to show you some pictures from California. This is on Hollywood Boulevard at the Guinness Book of World Records Museum with an animated Sikh character beckoning everyone to come in. And some models at a video shoot here in the Bay Area. The Watsonville School, the Mount Madonna School, does a Navratri every year in which the crowd fires arrows into a image of Ravana. And the last two pictures I'll show, there was a military veteran named Parminder Singh Shergill who had suffered from a mental illness and was having an episode, and the police came and he apparently challenged them with a knife and he was killed by the police. There was an investigation and the police were exonerated, as often happens, but he was buried with military honors, and I attended the funeral here, and you can see his mother. She's being given the flag from a serviceman for her fallen son, of course, all of her community and family members around her. And then this final picture is his funeral procession, the American flag, and then, of course, all of the many generations of Indian Americans who are bearing him in tribute. So I think I'll end there, and I thank you for your time and attention, and I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Preston. Just these images are so powerful to see the diaspora all over the world, and thank you for sharing your talent with us, and it's exciting to see these. Just a quick introduction. I am the Indiaspora Philanthropy Initiatives Manager, and so glad that each one of us are here tonight, and just really some inspiring speakers and panelists. And thank you everyone for joining. Next, I want to introduce a really special treat for us tonight. It's something that is engaging the youth in philanthropy, which is something that we aim to do a lot. And I think that it's so important to start, engaging youth in philanthropy at an early age. So I want to introduce our next moderator, who will be doing a fireside chat to introduce her. Her name is Mona Shah. She is an independent advocacy and policy consultant. She primarily works with a nonprofits, philanthropists, and government agencies, and she specializes specifically in health policy and social issues. Mona, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Great, thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. So I am part of the Sarvamangal Family Trust. We are a charitable trust based in Orange County, California. And my husband and I have young children ourselves. So we really believe that it's never too young to start cultivating a philanthropic mindset and really a lifelong sense of duty to give back to your community however you can. We are second generation Indian Americans, but we also want today's Indian American youth, whether they're first, second, third generation in the United States, to always feel connected to their Indian roots. So that is why our family was proud to support the Indian Philanthropy Alliance's inaugural essay competition. And we were really excited by involving youth and engaging them and really giving them the opportunity to tell us what philanthropy means for them in their lives today. And hopefully we can make this contest a tradition. I do want to thank Alex Counts and his team. There were several judges from the India Philanthropy Alliance's member organizations who were involved in the process. And we did receive a lot of very high quality essays, interestingly, a lot from the Midwest and Southern regions of the United States. So really all of the judges read every single essay. And then we came together to have a very robust and lively discussion. So choosing the finalists and winners were not easy, but I am excited today to at least virtually chat with our winners. We had a middle school category and a high school category. And before we get to the two winners, I of course wanted to recognize our finalists and runners up, because all the students we think did a fantastic job with these essays and talking about philanthropy and especially connecting it back to India. So our runners up, oops, can you actually go back to our finalists? There we go. So we have our middle school division, Sumir Agrawal from Austin, Texas. We have Diya Pai, also from Austin, Texas. In our high school division, we had such a tough time deciding that we actually had 6 finalists. They are Mira Bhatia from Chicago, Rhea Chakradeo from Rutherford, New Jersey, Amit Kama from Atlanta, Georgia, Nitya Maineni, Bidash Bandi, and Shreen Shafkani. And then next slide, please. Our runners up from the middle school division, we had Aditya Ajit of West Des Moines, Iowa, and he focused on access to education. And then we had in our high school division, Shreya Yarlagada of Johnston, Iowa, and she focused on digital life skills training for girls. And what I really appreciated is that these students truly covered a very wide variety of topics in terms of different issues confronting India today. And so now I would like to announce our winners who are with us today. From the middle school division, we have Rohan Jalamala Sethi and Mahir Adoni. And Rohan and Mahir, if you're on, I would love to just have a brief conversation with you about your essay and your thoughts on philanthropy today.
Hello.
Hey, Mahir, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Well, first of all, congratulations again for being our winner. So can you just share with us why at such a young age philanthropy is important to you and what you've been personally doing to advance the cause of education in India, which is what you focused your essay on?
Yeah. So the emotional connection I sort of have to this topic, to education in India is my grandmother. So my mom's mother, my maternal grandmother, She's an amazing woman. She's very accomplished. When in high school, she was actually very good at basketball and track, and none of those genes carried on to me, which is very unfortunate. But either way, when she grew up, she actually founded a school in my mom's hometown, Guntur in India. It's called Jawahar English Medium School, so kindergarten to 10th grade. And growing up, I would be in India all the time, to visit family. And the first floor is where my mom grew up, my mother's house, and the top 3 floors are the school. So I was face to face a lot with the structure and the curriculum and the benefits and also the drawbacks of Indian education and the shortages. And I think that's really what exposed me and inspired me, just to learn more about the topic and aid it and help it grow and experience it through kind of a digital media framework, which is, I talk about that in my essay.
That's awesome. Thank you. So clearly philanthropy has a multi-generational impact, no matter what age you're doing the exposure and getting exposed to, which I love. Rohan, are you here?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi. So this is our middle school winner. Rohan, again, fantastic job on your essay as well. And so in your essay, you talked about clean water access. So can you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in this issue and how you, some of your ideas on how this could be addressed through an eco-friendly and natural solution?
Well, actually, pretty recently, me and my family, we got the opportunity, during our recent visit to India, we got the opportunity to take a tour of some projects that are being conducted by the Sego Foundation. Some of those projects, they were solving different problems like education for girls, proper schools, and the cleanliness of water. So when I saw the cleanliness of water solution they had, it really intrigued me. It was a biosand filter solution, and it really intrigued me. The basic premise of that is you harvest rainwater from that lands on the roofs of buildings. You take that water and it goes in these large tanks that consist of sand, and that sand, it filters all the impurities of the water, and you get clean water that you can drink through taps or can be stored in more tanks for later use.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then Rohan, I'll ask you another question. So as the winners of the competition, the winners and the runners up were both given a certain amount of money to provide a grant to the organization of their choosing. So Rohan, can you tell me the organization that you chose and why you chose it?
I chose the Sego Foundation because when I saw their solution for the cleanliness of water, as well as their solutions for all the other problems, I really liked them. So I think the Sego Foundation, they have really smart ideas to the solution, to whatever problem they're given. And yeah, that's why I donated the grant to them. And they have a motto, which is transforming lives one school at a time. And I also really believe in that motto as well.
That's wonderful. And Maher, I'm going to ask you the same question. Who did you choose as your grant recipient and why?
So I ended up directing my grant to the American Indian Foundation. It was really hard to figure out where to direct the grant because there's so many amazing organizations that are so deserving and they do so many great initiatives. But I felt like the American Indian Foundation best aligned with the values I personally hold and what I kind of try to get across in my essay. Like, for example, I was really fascinated by their learning and migration program. So yeah, I think like Rohan said, I felt like they best align with my mission, what I sought to do. So I was very proud to support them.
That's awesome. And obviously, through the India Philanthropy Alliance, you'll see there's so many really great foundations and organizations who are creating awareness and fundraising here in the US, but then all of that money is going to, boots on the ground programs in India, which is great. So I'm gonna ask you, Maher, since you have an audience of a lot of people older than you, who are already philanthropists, on behalf of your generation of Indian American philanthropists, what advice do you have for some of the people here today?
This is also a very hard question for me to answer. I mean, this generation of Indian American philanthropists have done so much, and I still have a lot to learn. You know, I'm no expert. But if there's one common thread, at least I noticed in all the essays in my age group, you know, the finalists and the runners up, and they were all amazing, is just the idea of looking at things through a different perspective. And I think figuring out how to approach problems, wherever they are, they're health related, education related, and figuring out how to address pressing issues with the ways or methods that aren't obvious at first necessarily is something my generation has, I feel like, a fairly good handle on, and something that would be worthwhile to pursue for anyone, any initiative.
Thank you. And Rohan, do you have anything that you want to share with everyone who's here today?
What I would have to say is whatever adults do, really, kids follow in their footsteps. Kids look up to adults like you guys in the audience a lot, really. So I would say as long as adults set a really good example for kids, I think the kids can live up to that bar and maybe even accomplish something greater.
Awesome. Well, certainly both of you have a very, very bright future ahead of you. I'm sure this won't be the last time that we see you in a forum like this. So congratulations again. Thank you for participating. And again, I'm sure we'll be seeing both of you and hearing your names in the years to come. I also, again, as they mentioned, wanted to congratulate the two organizations who received their grants, the Sehgal Foundation, which is actually the newest member of the India Philanthropy Alliance, and of course, the American India Foundation. Also, Suri and Edha Sehgal actually matched. So 3 out of the 4 finalists actually and winners decided to donate to them, and they matched that funding, which was awesome. And as we said, this is our inaugural essay competition, but as a family, we really enjoyed sponsoring it and supporting it. And we just got some wonderful essays, as Maher mentioned. They're all online. So I encourage you, if you have the chance, to go read some of the others. There really were some really fascinating topics that were addressed. So we hope to continue this. I also want to thank Indiaspora for allowing us to have this time today to really highlight these two amazing youth, but all of our finalists and runners up and participants. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohan and Maher, and to all the kids who participated. And thank you to the India Philanthropy Alliance for putting this on. And thank you, especially Mona, to you and your family for your support for doing this. This has been really quite intriguing and inspiring, I think, for a lot of us to see youth involved, and we hope to continue this. I hope that IPA wants to go ahead and continue this as well. Next, I'd like to introduce our panel on socially responsible investing. And our moderator for this is Radhika Nair. She is the director at Arabella Advisors. She works with individuals and families to help them realize and achieve their philanthropic goals. Before she was at Arabella Advisors, she was a associate director in strategic philanthropy with Diaspora. So Radhika, please, we'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Gabriel, and congratulations to Mahir and Rohan. And I think I have the same headphones as Rohan, so I hope that makes me, in touch with the next generation. So welcome to I believe this is the final panel session for the summit, and we have saved the best for last. For the next half hour, we're going to spotlight impact investing, which is an investing approach that individuals and institutions can take to make our world more positive, equitable, and just, alongside effective grant making and advocacy. All money has impact, so we might as well make sure that impact is positive. In today's discussion, we won't focus on making the case for impact investing, which we probably all know and have heard, but we'll focus on 3 goals: demystifying impact investing for those who may be earlier in their impact investing journey, highlight concrete opportunities for taking action, and at the macro level, discuss, is this a big reset point for impact investing, just as it is for grant making? And have we seen the best impact investing can offer? If not, what will it take to get there? And we're going to explore these questions with 3 experts who have diverse experiences with impact investing in the US as well as internationally. And I would call them role models in impact investing. We have Shekhar Narasimhan, who is managing partner of Beekman Advisors. He also serves as chairman of Pavilion Capital, which is focused on sustainable infrastructure investing. We have Vijay Advani, who is the executive chairman of Naveen, the investment manager of TIAA. Vijay is also on the board of the Global Impact Investing Network. And we have Sachi Chenoy, who is co-founder of and chief impact officer of Upaya Social Ventures, which is a social enterprise growing early stage businesses to create dignified jobs for the poorest of the poor. And a few context setting points before turning to our speakers. So what are we talking about when we talk about impact investing? The field is plagued with confusing terms, so want to provide some quick, clear definitions. First, impact investing is defined as investments made into companies, organizations, and funds with the intention to generate social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. Impact investments aren't any one thing. They are the range of opportunities you can pursue between traditional investing and grant making. And the first rule of engagement in this approach is really to clarify your intention and motivation. Do you have an investor or a philanthropy mindset? Is your goal to maximize profits while aligning your financial portfolio with your personal values? Then responsible and sustainable type of impact investing may be for you. And that refers to applying both positive and negative screens to your investments, taking out bad actors, and proactively pursuing investments based on ESG goals and criteria. Or is your objective to seek out the best solution for the challenge you want to solve and bring greater resources to bear in pursuing your philanthropic goals? In that case, you may want to pursue an impact first approach to impact investing, where financial return is secondary to social impact. And this could look like making an investment in a mission-driven company that has a scalable solution to a problem you're trying to solve, which you wouldn't be able to duplicate through traditional grant making. So that was a few definitions for context, which leads me to the first question. And Vijay, I want to start with you here. Can you tell us more about your work at Naveen? You are an asset manager, you're also an impact investor. We'd love to hear, is this a watershed moment for the type of work you're doing?
So firstly, thank you, as well as Radhika, as well as thank you to the Indiaspora for giving me this opportunity. I think the way we look at this is, it's a continuum, it's a journey, not a destination. And you start with responsible investing, you move on to ESG products, then you go talk about impact, and finally, philanthropy. And at Naveen, we manage roughly about $1.1 trillion, and we've committed that by the end of this year, our entire portfolio teams will look at ESG factors before putting them into a portfolio. So that's a big commitment. I think it's the first any large asset manager has done. From the $1.1 trillion, 30 billion is in ESG funds and about 5 billion in impact. So we've had about 5 decades of experience in impact investing, all the way back from the apartheid time in South Africa. And it's ironic that September of this year was the 50th anniversary when Milton Friedman said there's only one social responsibility of a business, and that is to generate maximum return for their shareholders. And obviously a lot has changed since then. There's not a single RFP that we get where they don't ask us about our values, about our impact, about our responsible investing, whether it's in the munis, whether it's in equities, whether it's in private equity. I'll just leave you with one thought. Responsible investing, so why it is a watershed, I would say, assets, subject to responsible investing reached, has gone up by 18 times since 1995 to an estimated $12 trillion. Okay. Also, now it represents $1 in $4
or 38% increase from just 2 years ago. So clearly, as millennials, and we heard two young citizens talk about that, as millennials inherit money, they feel that it's not just about the return you make, but also doing well while doing good. So I think it is, and this pandemic has just magnified that. So I think it is a watershed time, and we as a firm are fully committed.
Thanks, Vijay. I'll turn to Sachi now. Sachi, can you tell us more about the unique model of your work? Upaya is a nonprofit as well as an impact investor. What are the needs and opportunities you are seeing at your end of the impact investing spectrum?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much, Radhika, and to Indiaspora for this opportunity. So we at Upaya have been at this for a decade. And yes, we are a nonprofit. We made that decision deliberately because we are at the impact first side of the spectrum that you talked about. No matter how well our investments may pay off in terms of a financial return, we would have failed if we haven't hit our impact targets first. And our North Star is to make sure that we invest in businesses that can create dignified jobs for the poorest of the poor. And so anyone who's interested in looking at our metrics on this can go to our website and see the poverty levels of some of the people before they got these jobs, and then track the income increase that they are experiencing, and then the other benefits that they are able to derive from having access to stable and increased income. It's especially because we work in the most marginalized communities in India that we decided to structure as a nonprofit and really put philanthropic capital to its best use. We love philanthropic capital because it is the most patient capital. It is the most risk tolerant capital. We don't have investors that have set really high IRR bars for us. So we can take philanthropic capital and then we invest it as long-term patient capital in the businesses. And we feel that it might take 5, maybe 8, maybe even 10 years to recover that capital and get some upside. But that's precisely what these businesses really need. They need someone who is going to stick with them, give them the guidance that they need so that they can scale up and really create jobs and leave our nest and be able to tap into the capital markets. I'll just quickly end with saying that our average investment size is $50,000 US. These are very small early stage companies that, and in very rural areas often, that we are investing in. But over the last 10 years, we've made 22 investments that have collectively created over 16,000 jobs for the poor.
Thanks, Sachi, and we'll come back to you. Want to hear more about the urgent opportunities right now in India. Mm-hmm. Moving to Shaker, I want to bring you into this conversation. Shaker, I know you do a lot. You are a change maker on many different levels. Can you describe for us where you sit on the impact investing spectrum, what work you're doing, what are you seeing from where you are, and provide some examples? I know you do a lot of work in affordable housing, opportunity zones.
Sure. So let me just give you a sort of a 30-second history because I've been really inspired by an awful lot of what has been pulled together here by Indiaspora. First of all, my journey after coming from India was to work in Eastern Kentucky, in Central Appalachia in the 1970s, when they actually thought I was Cherokee. And I didn't bother to dissuade them because they didn't know where India was at that time. But 80% of the houses in some parts of Eastern Kentucky didn't have indoor plumbing. It was very hard for people in India to believe that there was so much poverty in the United States. It just struck me that sometimes you do have to do stuff at home also. We actually do have rather severe problems in the United States. I did do a fund that is impact driven on social needs only, with entrepreneurs who've moved back from the United States to their native countries in Uganda, Sri Lanka, and India. We've invested in several companies, which have all done fairly well. Because I follow the sort of Ratan Tata school that if you go into emerging markets and you're taking on the hardest problems, if you succeed, that's impact. So we don't actually do what Sachi does, which is frankly, in some ways, much harder work, which is to put impact first and raise money on that premise. But in the last 3 years, the focus for me has been on revitalizing small towns in America. There are 10,000 towns that over the past 30 years have been completely disinvested because of the destruction of manufacturing, textile, tobacco, furniture making, you name it. And because of that fundamental industrial change that's happened, these towns literally got left behind. And we've been figuring out, using opportunity zones, using private equity, what revitalization means that's comprehensive. And if towns decline over 20 years and get disinvested, usually the young people all leave. A very simple measurement standard is, what's the recidivism rate for young people? If they basically start to say at high school that the minute I graduate, I'm leaving, that's a town that desperately needs investment. So we actually go into towns like that, spend 3 years, build some political and governance infrastructure, and then do an anchor project, if you will, to try to bring capital in that's public and private. So that's my focus today in impact, is how do you bring back towns that in America where people feel very abandoned and left behind, and invest in them. And we're doing it using opportunity zones.
Thank you, Shekhar. And this is a question for all the panelists. Have we seen the best that impact investing has to offer? What are the barriers? What do you want to see more of? Vijay, Shekhar, Sachi.
First, I think the arrow has left the bow. I think this was a fringe investment several years ago. It's become mainstream. I think the next concern I have is impact washing. A lot of people use the buzzwords. So what's important really is impact measurement. We're spending a lot of time. You mentioned I was on the board of the GIN, so that we can measure impact, which is not easy. I mean, in the 1930s, you had the Great Depression, is because each company basically showed out their accounts in a different way till you got FASB. So you really need something that's tangible and is global, that you can measure impact. And that's something that we are now trying to work with the stock exchanges, NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange, London, to say, if you claim you're doing impact, even if you're a manufacturing firm and you're listed on the New York Stock Exchange, you need to be able to measure that and disclose that. It's nothing like, demonstrating what you've actually done. So that's something I think is the next several years will be the next watershed. It's about impact is here to stay, but it's the measurement and disclosure of impact that will be more important.
And if I can add to that, I completely agree with Vijay. And one thing I really appreciate that the GIN has done is they have collected, industry experts from all different sectors, and they've codified standards for metrics in what they're calling IRIS+. And I've been privileged to be a member of that working group. And so I would completely agree that there needs to be better convergence around standards for how we talk about impact, so that we're all saying the same thing and using the same standards. But one thing I would also add to that, to answer your question, Radhika, I do think the best is still yet to come in impact investing. And what I see happening now as a result of COVID that I find very heartening is partnership. Partnership in the true sense of partnership. Yes, I think impact investing was kind of a fringe movement 10 or 15 years ago. It's great that there's so much money pouring into it, but until the pandemic, it was still each organization setting up its own structure or its own fund and going at it alone. And what I'm hearing about now, just in the last 6 months, are these really effective coalitions that have come together. Commercial lenders, venture capitalists, all sitting on the backbone of philanthropy and saying, we're going to put together a blended capital fund. The philanthropy is going to absorb a lot of that risk that is going to be inherent in some of these investments to really have impact. But then the commercial capital can also come in and have its own place to help with the growth and scale of these companies. And to actors that really understand the role that their capital plays, but working together in a really collaborative way. And I think we'll just see so much more of that in the coming months.
So Radhika, if people don't know who Raj Chetty is, you should get to know him. And being at Arabella, you probably do. He is one of the most brilliant demographers of our generation at Harvard. What he has done is he's tracked something that we all know instinctively. Where you are born and who you're born to has a great deal to do with the potential for success, unfortunately. So his mobility studies tracking tens of thousands of people, for people of color, people living in rural communities, larger communities, smaller ones, and saying, what happened to them? What was their prospect for success? How much income did they generate over the next 20 years? Is seminal work, because what it really proves is what I feel like our lives should be dedicated to doing, which is it's all very well for politicians to say that, you know, it doesn't matter what zip code you're born in, everyone's going to do great. That's BS, frankly. It's not true. Where you are born, who you're born to makes a great deal of difference. So some people need more help. Some people need more assistance naturally because they start with disadvantage. Others need less. We belong to privilege, most of the people in this line. So I'm not sure that we fully absorb that. So if that's true, what impact investing can focus on, and where I don't think it does today, is focusing on the places where these people are, so that the disparities that they encounter and the income inequality that gets created simply because of where they are can be addressed. And so even in India, this is true. The amount of investment that goes into the top 5 metros in India is 80% of all the capital that goes to the rest of 20% of India. 80%, 20%. It's true in the United States. I think you're aware there are basically 5 places in the United States that get 75% of the venture capital investing. Is that because all the people living there are smarter? Whoops. I don't think so. They've created some constellation of factors that enable those metropolis or those areas to succeed more. I'm just saying, let's duplicate that theorem, as Raj says, in 100,000 places around the world so people can actually live where they are born and be successful. That should be our impact in the future.
Thank you, Shekhar. So you're saying that impact investing, in order for impact investing to drive equity, it needs to focus on places.
It needs to focus on place, and it needs to be long-term oriented. The biggest problem Sachi has, I'm sure, is how many people give you money and say it's okay if you keep it for 10 years. Not 1, 2, 3 feel-good money. This is a project to do something successful takes a long time because decline takes a long time. So it's convincing people that duration really makes a difference. Place and where you invest makes a big difference. Yes, there's more risk in certain places, as Vijay would tell you, but there's a way to de-risk that. So find a way in impact to de-risk, but find a way to concentrate in those places that need the help the most.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Shekhar, especially as you're talking about some of the challenges we've had. We've been so lucky that we've had foundation partners, philanthropists that have been with us for our entire journey that really believe in what we're doing and really have that patient mindset and want to see the impact. I wish there were many more of them. I wish we could really scale up what we do, and we're starting to, for sure.
Come on, Vijay, let's go. Vijay's got the money here, okay?
No, I agree with both my co-panelists that, we are seeing, whether it's on affordable housing or financial inclusion, particularly these two areas, and healthcare, that unless you bring these, bring the help to those towns rather than get those. We've seen what happened in India with migrant workers, right? They were all brought to the cities, and then there was this lockdown. But if they were provided the help, and this is a good opportunity, is to provide employment, affordable housing, financial inclusion, healthcare services in smaller towns, when you can basically see, individuals continue to stay where they're pretty much born. And so those are some of the things actually even though we are a very large organization, we have very long-term money because our parent is an insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
So we look out 10, 15, 20 years. And that's why we are doing, in farmland where there's water conservation, et cetera, we can look out several years. But I do recognize the smaller funds have that concern because their shareholders expect a turnaround in 3 to 5 years, which is very hard in impact.
And I just wanted to mention, Radhika, I posted something on the chat about the charitable commitment. A partner of mine in Democracy Alliance created this, completely voluntary. And basically what it says is for all those that have their own foundations or their own donor advised funds, make a commitment during COVID to spend down more. Because if there is a crisis today, a humanitarian crisis across the world, it is today. So take that commitment. It's completely voluntary. This is not a buffet. This could be very average people are making this commitment because they're saying, what can I do more of today that would be viable and useful, that can really make a difference? And it's a simple way to do it. So please make the commitment today.
Thanks, Shekhar. And in this conversation, you all raise an important point of, for those who are listening who are torn between whether they should be responding to the magnitude of need in India or the magnitude of need in the US, what advice would you provide them? We don't have those of us on the line may not have limitless resources, right? There's an opportunity cost for everything. And I know each of you are engaged internationally as well as in the US. Of course, that you run, you're the co-founder of this organization. What advice would you provide those listening?
I'd like to echo what's been said, but especially what Ankur had said on the previous panel, that the time for philanthropy is now. The need has never been greater. But the thing I would add is, for everyone, regardless of how much you are able to give, let's start to shift the mindset from philanthropy as relief funding to thinking much more longer term and setting the stage for long-term business development and business health. And so what does that really mean, and what does that translate into? So instead of just giving for aid today, consider making a gift in the form of, say, a recoverable grant to a nonprofit that is investing like us, or a business that could use some kind of growth capital. And people usually ask me, well, if you could give an outright grant, why wouldn't you do that? Why would you ask them to try to recover it? And I say it's very powerful if that small business owner can take that grant and pay you back after a period of 2 to 3 years, then suddenly they have demonstrated that they are a bankable, investable business. And then the capital markets open up for them. So you are really helping with your philanthropy to seed the markets being able to come in.
You're de-risking for others.
Exactly.
You're the trailblazer.
Exactly.
So go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say any philanthropist can do that.
And Radhika, I don't think this is either or. I think I just remind people that we are among the fortunate. There are 8 billion people potentially in the world who are less fortunate than us. We can't do everything. So be strategic, be smart about what you do, but most importantly, do as much as you can at this time, whether it is in India or it is in the United States.
Thanks, Shekhar. Vijay or Sachi, do you have any concrete recommendations, next steps, final words you want to share?
My final word, because I actually have another event that I have to go to, but I think what I'll share with the group, what my family and I do is, rather than spray and pray that everybody, all causes are great. It doesn't matter whether you pick Uganda or India or the United States. You pick what is passionate for you, whether it's education or health, and try and make, not to use a pun, no pun intended, but make an impact in that field. Rather than say, I'll do a little bit here, whatever is the dollar number, whether it's $100 or 100,000, pick something that you care about, that you can follow and have that as a passion. And it could be here or in India, it could be in any field. All of them, all areas require your help and support.
Thank you. Well, if Shekhar and Sachi don't have any final words, I think that we can conclude this panel and I can turn it back to Gabriel and Ashish. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And this was a terrific panel. Hi, this is M.R. Rangaswamy here, the founder of Indiaspora. And we are now very close to finishing up our great day. We had a session in the morning and now again this evening. And next up is our keynote. Vidya Shah was an entrepreneur. She and her husband started Edelweiss in India, very successful financial services firm. And now she's a philanthropist who is the CEO of Edelgive, which is doing amazing work during the COVID time and even before. And so Vidya is going to talk about her North Star. And we're delighted that she was able to get up really bright and early in the morning and join us today. So welcome, Vidya, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Emar. And it's an absolute delight to be here. And, when Ashish and you asked me to speak and, I decided to speak about the true norths. I know Sachi just spoke about the North Star as well. And a lot of what I'm going to say would probably be preaching to the converted. So please do forgive me if I, sound a little more sort of recommendatory than otherwise. And it's truly really about, my experiences over the last 12 years of really working in the field of philanthropy. So I'd like to actually start by going back in a sense to history. And history does teach us several lessons, some which we choose to forget and some which we cannot help but revisit. Today, I wanted to just spend the first few minutes of this speech reflecting on some of the events from history that could shape a lot of our understanding of the context in which we live today. In 1347, so more than 700, almost 700 years ago, 12 ships from the Black Sea docked in Sicily. Came as the plague would come to be known. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death would kill more than 20 million people in Europe, almost 1/3 of the continent's population. Now, these were still the Middle Ages, yet it was global trade that enabled the rapid spread of the plague. China, India, Persia, and Egypt were all affected. Of course, it was the Middle Ages, so the stars were blamed for the affliction, and scholastic medicine was still a very nascent science. The feudal system had begun to break down, and this with the plague caused big labor shortages. In England in 1381, this and an abhorrent poll tax caused the peasants to revolt. So the relative standing of capital and labor were reversed, and these Middle Ages between roughly 400 BC and 1400 AD were regarded as a time of ignorance, oppression, and superstition. But it seems as if this, almost cataclysmic event began to change the way the Middle Ages, or began to end actually the Middle Ages. And new thinking was already underway. It was in the form of the Renaissance. Artists reclaimed ancient techniques for drawing and painting with perspective. Musicians recovered melody. Humanism unsettled the stagnant rule of religion over people's minds. There was Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Palladio, Brunelleschi, Boccaccio, several people who became foundation stones of European thought. There was Columbus and Vespucci, who changed the map of the world. There was Galileo, who established the scientific method. So the Renaissance was perhaps the greatest efflorescence of science and art in Western civilization. And this rebirth came on the back of a pandemic that is estimated to have killed between 75 million and 200 million people worldwide. So the point of all this narration of 700-year-old history is really to say that perhaps we are at another point in time when society will have to make radical adjustments. Hopefully it will be for good, but it could be for ill. At 8 a.m. on March 24th this year, as COVID-19 began to threaten the world, our Prime Minister Modi announced a countrywide lockdown for 3 weeks. At that time, it was 3 weeks. But it ended up being one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, and only hindsight will tell us if the lockdown served the purpose of reducing infections and deaths from COVID. Of course, the impact on lives and livelihood has been tremendous, but the pressure has been most significant on the bottom of the pyramid. Migrant workers, slum dwellers, daily wage workers, even domestic help. This impact has been quite debilitating. We have a fragile health system, and our government machinery, our civil society machinery has been struggling to work at district levels to provide food and relief support. Each one of us is doing our little bit. But if we look back in the future at what we have done, how would we judge ourselves? In any disaster, there are spectators and there are participants. History judges us by how we have behaved and what we have done. And so my question is, will we really see a new renaissance for humanity, or will we forget, especially in India, the blue skies and the clean air that many of us have experienced for the first time? Will we go back to the old ways of living and consuming? So COVID-19 actually has given me this rare opportunity to reflect on my own journey. It has brought me back to the very essence of why I decided to start Edelgive Foundation in the first place. Over 12 years ago, as CFO of Edelweiss, it was a conscious call for me to step down from business and willingly embrace philanthropy as my future with the creation of Edelgive Foundation. In our journey of supporting over 150 NGOs, Edelgive has had the opportunity to work with some extremely impactful organizations, some of whom, or most of whom actually, are supporting the most vulnerable communities in the hinterlands of India. In this unique cohort, I found a large opportunity to use my experience from the financial services sector to support them. Much of the value we achieve in the world emerges from finding our purpose, big or small. I truly felt that I had found my purpose. And this purpose, backed by a set of values, I think has brought me this far. Now, once again, we find ourselves questioning our purpose, particularly as funders. I'm sure that 6 months ago, our inboxes, all of us here on this group, began overflowing. Our inboxes, we were all, overwhelmed with requests for support, messages about COVID, requests for financial support from NGOs that either we knew well or did not. The pressure for action and response was indeed very intense. I was myself very concerned. In fact, I was very confused about the response that we at Edelgive should provide, the stand we should take. But ultimately, we went back to first principles. What can we do and what do we do best? So having lived the last 6 months relying on our first principles, I bring to you today 3 of the most important learnings for me that have helped me find my purpose. Firstly, risk-free philanthropy is a myth. We cannot be assured 100% that our capital will be used exactly in the way we envision. And I have learned this the hard way. In 2008, when Edelgive was just starting out, we were investing in programs based largely on intuition and basic understanding of the organizations that we were in touch with. Some of the investments we went on to make, we call grants investments in Edelgive. Some of them went on to become mature organizations. Some absolutely missed the impact mark. But we stayed afloat. We were agile. We learned along the way. We found our focus areas. So over the years, we've realized, and we all know this, that social issues are unstructured. They're messy. They're complex. When one is dealing with communities, cultures, and social change, one cannot have a one-size-fits-all approach for all engagement. So this, push and pull, this agility is what has kept us going through the years. Particularly if you look at the Indian context, it is very hard to replicate programs step by step, even at villages which are perhaps only 20 miles apart. The landscape, the geography, the demography, all changes. And so it alters so quickly that you're left having to continuously evolve and adapt your strategies. So we may not have all the answers. We may try to make ourselves risk-free, but let's be honest, is that even possible? In our case, we chose to rely on our NGOs who are closer to reality and bring us the voices of the grassroots. Their voice in this decision-making has always taken precedence. So we found their suggestions in turn reduced our risks. Once we had found our purpose, it is important to trust the people we have chosen to be as partners in this process and help them achieve the goals we are collectively working toward. So this brings me to my second most important learning, which is really building a robust back-end system. So who doesn't like to be in the driver's seat? Who doesn't like to be known as a game changer, as a funder of innovation, as a funder of scale? But while this forward-looking attitude is of course warranted, it needs to be backed by a robust back-end system which can help build your credibility in the sector. Very early in Edelgive, we invested in creating this back-end system which could build our base for strategic philanthropy. Our ambition was much bigger than our reality in those days. And we invested in IT, we invested in robust monitoring systems, in compliance, in governance structures, and most importantly, in skilled and talented employees who could use these systems efficiently. And this has enabled us the bandwidth to select and support NGOs at a much larger and faster rate. And it has helped build our credibility as a platform of choice for philanthropy in India. So today, Edelgive is known for collaborative funding. We're engaged in 6 large collaborative initiatives from education, climate change, water and women, and the edgier side of women's empowerment around violence and access to legal justice. And we work with several grassroots organizations as well as international and national partners. And because of this approach, we were able to leverage and influence 10 times over than if we had just engaged individually. We were able to serve 150 NGOs, reach really far out places in India, the back and beyond, through many partners. And so from a small corpus of $100,000 when we began about 12 years ago, today we are able to commit over $12 million a year annually to our NGOs and also reach over 1.4 million people in the process. Finally, there's no real shame in co-learning. It is okay not to have all the answers. It is okay to reach out to others who might have some of them for you. And I credit my learning in the early years to the conversations I had with both NGOs and funders. And these conversations enabled me to understand in much depth the circumstances around which our organizations were functioning. I also pushed my contemporaries and my peers to share their experiences with me, and wherever possible, I shared the stories I had learned with them. As the third richest man on the planet, when Warren Buffett decided to engage in philanthropy, he approached his old friends, Bill and Melinda Gates. And that act was the catalyst for bringing to life the Giving Pledge, one of the most powerful platforms for billionaires to commit to contributing half of their wealth to philanthropy. So this ability to reach out to each other, to lean on each other, can have massive positive effects. So these are the three learnings. One, that risk-free philanthropy is a myth. Second, the value of a solid back-end process. And third, that there is no shame in co-learning, that have informed everything I have done. They have changed me as a person and built Edelgave into one of India's leading grant-making organizations. I want to leave you with these three learnings, but also with the understanding that the world cannot wait for our learning to be complete. We need to spend a lot of time to think, to deliberate, strategize, but also we need to rely on each other's strengths, trust our expertise, and act. We shouldn't forget that almost 820 million people go hungry every day across the world. Over 250 million children and youth are still out of school, and 10% of the world's population lives on less than $1.90 a day, showcasing poverty as a global challenge that shamefully we are yet to solve. So there is a lot we have to do collectively, and it is time to make our small beginnings, and it is in doing that we become better philanthropists. Anyone struggling to take a forward step or needs assistance, I'm very happy to personally engage, to help, and to learn from you. As I wrap up, I want to leave you with two interesting concepts that have left me energized even in these dark times. One is a TED Talk by Professor Martin Seligman, who's also known as the founder of positive psychology, a field of study that examines healthy states such as happiness and optimism. He speaks of happiness in three ways. Happiness can be the pleasant life, a great book, a great movie, a new purchase, a big house, a big car, a great vacation. But happiness can also be engagement, any activity that enables intense concentration and absorption, a state of flow when you're in the zone and you cannot feel anything else, as we do when we learn music or learn a new language. But happiness that comes from meaning or purpose is of the highest quality, and it is most enduring. The second is from Professor Michael Norton, who postulates that money can buy happiness only if you spend that money on others who have more need of it. A gift for others, a charitable donation. So to all of us, I say, as in this group, as those with affluence and influence, spending on other people has a much higher return for you than spending on yourself. If you think you cannot buy happiness, then you are not spending it right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vidya, for that inspiring talk. We do have some time for questions. So if people want to raise their hand on Zoom, I can call upon them. But in the meanwhile, Vidya, I wanted a question for you, which is, looking back at your journey, is there something you would have done differently now that you've gone through this journey on day one?
I think, when we started out, we said that we were bringing the learnings of the for-profit world to the not-for-profit world, the business concepts, the management concepts. How do you build great organizations even in civil society? I wish I had paused and seen how much more actually the for-profit world can learn from the not-for-profit world. I think that pause and that thinking, because it has been tremendous, and we've used these last few years in particular to document that and to see how we can actually do business with a lot more thoughtfulness and empathy, while still keeping the profit motive and the market cap maximization motive. But there's so much more you can do in building a for-profit enterprise that borrows from some of the values, that civil society organizations carry. And I wish I'd spent more time and not sounded arrogant saying we're bringing learnings from the for-profit to the not-for-profit and not see that as an exchange.
Thank you. We have a question from Ken Silverman. So Ken, could you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Certainly, thank you. First, congratulations to you, MR, and Sanjeev and your team. This has been an extraordinary evening, afternoon, and morning in India. And thank you, Vidya. That was inspirational. My question is this: how has the increased religious division in India over the past half decade and more impacted philanthropic outreach and impact?
I think it has made our work a lot more difficult. It has made the work of our NGO partners on the ground a lot more difficult. I think issues of human rights and issues of caste and class have been reported a lot more, and therefore it has sort of put a lot of pressure, particularly on Indian philanthropy, to do something about Indian issues and not really rely always on the foundations that have traditionally focused on issues like this, like Ford or the Gates Foundation. The other thing that has happened is if you look at the issues of, say, for example, one of the areas that we work in, which is social and the economic empowerment of women. And on the social empowerment side, we found a lot of issues around violence, access to legal justice. And we've had to actually push ourselves in that one area to look at very innovative ways of addressing these issues. So we've actually had to find organizations that can use information technology combined with great communication and great outreach to communities. There is a campaign that is probably in the early 800s. How do you use things? But the other one has been really the issue.
Vidya, you're breaking up. Vidya, you're
for
breaking
the first
up.
time, there's a lot more conversation around involving.
I think we're having some technical difficulties. Ken, I hope we were able to answer at least half your question, but I think Vidya's had some problems with her Zoom reception there.
Yes.
But thank you. And I think it's getting a
Sorry,
pretty
Emma, this connection is a little bad.
Sorry, Vidya, can you hear us?
Yes, yes, I can. Yes.
Okay. So you got cut off halfway in that question. So I think we missed the second half.
Yeah, I was saying about how we've had to make our funding and funding of our organization and more inclusive. So especially in the area of women empowerment, to be able to include men and boys in a very creative way has been, an interesting challenge for us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vidya. Thank you for getting up early and joining us, but it's getting pretty late here. I know for folks on the East Coast, it's past 10 o'clock. So thank you so much for joining us. And I want to turn the the floor back to Ashish on our side.
Thanks, Amar, and thank you, Vidya, for sharing your story and the lessons learned. And also, thank you for the compelling call to action at the end. This concludes our Philanthropy Summit. We have had an incredible day, starting with session 1 this morning that focused on India, and session 2 focused on US and the diaspora. We would like to thank each of our 36 speakers and panelists and over 400 attendees who participated in the 2 sessions. In closing, I would like to highlight 3 points to summarize the day. Number 1, while we all acknowledge that we have a long way to go to reverse the setback that the development sector has suffered in the past 6 to 7 months, I think we must pause and celebrate the initial successes that we've had, where the community and the diaspora has really come together with a lot of energy and intent. So that needs to be celebrated. Number 2, the pandemic has brought to the forefront issues and challenges that have existed for many years. So whether it's the migrant worker situation in India or the equity gap that exists in the US that disproportionately impacts marginalized communities, I think we need to acknowledge it and we need to collectively work towards addressing these challenges and gaps. And finally, we all agree that this is a huge opportunity for all stakeholders for new, bold, and innovative collaborations. And based on the conversations that we've had today, it's clear that we are all eager to not let this opportunity pass. So from all of us at Indiaspora, thank you all for joining us. Happy Gandhi Jayanti and good night.